Hello and welcome to the skeletal system. Together with the muscular system, the skeletal system is very important for allowing exercise movement and performing various movements of the body. And we're going to use our friend today to help us work through the skeletal system. Okay, what are the four main roles of the skeletal system? Point number one is protection. And a good example of this is the rib cage. As you can see, this is a nice big structure, a nice big cage-like structure that provides protection to the vital organs inside the body. Organs such as the heart and lungs. And of course, the brain is protected by the skull. The skeletal system also allows movement. It's responsible for movement. Now, I'll give you an example. When we look at the muscular system to help us identify this point, the pectoralis major is a large muscle that sits right here at the top of the chest. It originates or starts along the bone called the sternum, which is this bone here in front of the body or front of the rib cage. It originates along the sternum, also along the clavicle or collarbone, and inserts into the humerus or upper arm bone. Now, when the pectoralis major contracts to shorten, it causes a number of movements, but one of those movements is moving the humerus towards the middle of the body or towards the midline of the body. So together with the muscular system, the skeletal system is essential for allowing movement of the body. Next one is calcium. The skeletal system stores calcium, which is a mineral we obtain from our diet. And as you're probably aware, the role of calcium is important for maintaining the integrity and bone health of the skeletal system, therefore minimising the likelihood of injury or fractures that could be caused from impact. Calcium also has an important role in muscle contraction. Blood cell formation, the last role of the skeletal system, particularly red blood cells, which are responsible for delivering oxygen to working muscles of the body. Red blood cells only have a lifespan of maybe 100 to 120 days, and therefore they need to be continually replenished or replaced. This process involves utilising the skeletal system for that. Okay, the skeletal system has two main divisions, the axial skeletal system or the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. Now, the axial skeleton basically has four main structures. Structure number one is the skull. Okay, structure number two is the vertebral column, or our spinal cord or spinal column. It starts way down here at the coccyx or tailbone in the pelvic region and extends all the way up to the base of the skull. And we'll look at the vertebral column in a little bit more detail later on. We have our rib cage, which as mentioned is vital for the protection of vital organs such as the heart and lungs. And we have the sternum, this flat bone at the front of our body, which is responsible for increasing the integrity and rigidity of the rib cage. And then we have the appendicular skeleton, which is basically everything outside of the axial skeleton. Structures of the appendicular skeleton include the clavicle or collarbone, the scapula or shoulder blade, the humerus or the upper arm bone, the radius and the ulna, which are the two bones of the lower arm or two bones of the forearm. Now, the way that you tell the difference between the radius and ulna is in reference to anatomical position, which is covered in the class Movement and Anatomical Terminology. But for our purposes, anatomical position is standing nice and tall, arms extended by the side, palm of your hand open and facing forwards. Now, the terms medial and lateral can be used to describe various structures of the body. Medial means towards the midline of the body. And the midline of the body would obviously be straight down the centre like so. Medial means close or closer to the midline of the body. Lateral means away or further away from the midline of the body. So in reference to the radius and ulna, we can say that the radius is the most lateral bone of the lower arm, or the radius is lateral to the ulna. And vice versa. We can say the ulna is the most medial bone of the lower arm or the most medial bone of the forearm, or the ulna is medial to the radius. Moving on, we have the bones of the hand. The wrist bones, which are these short cube-shaped bones, are known as carpals. And you've probably heard the term carpal tunnel syndrome, which is an overuse injury of the wrist. We then have metacarpals, which are basically the bones of the back of our hand and palm of our hand. And then our fingers are known as phalanges. Moving down with the appendicular skeleton, we have the pelvis or pubic bone, hip region, and the bones of the lower limbs, which include the femur, which is our large thigh bone, patella or kneecap, tibia and fibula, which are the two bones of the lower leg. And again, in anatomical position, the tibia is the most medial bone of the lower leg, and the fibula is the most lateral bone of the lower leg. Or the tibia is medial to the fibula, or the fibula is lateral to the tibia. And then we have our foot bones. Our ankle bones are again short cube-shaped bones called tarsals. Our foot bones, top and base of our foot, are known as metatarsals, and our toes, like our fingers, are called phalanges. So in actual fact, we have 20 phalanges of the body. Okay, looking at the vertebral column, as mentioned, it is that structure that starts way up here at the top of the base of the skull, all the way down to the coccyx or tailbone. Now the vertebral column protects the spinal cord, and the spinal cord is the structure that runs from the brain all the way down the middle of the vertebral column, right down to the hip region. And together, the spinal cord and the brain, known as the central nervous system, represents about 90% of all the neural tissue found in the body, and it is the most important structure that coordinates our movements. The vertebral column provides support and protection to the spinal cord. They are individual vertebrae that sit on top of each other. Each one has a hole or a foramen, and that hole allows the spinal cord to pass through and have a series of encirculated protection all the way from the base of the skull right down to the pelvic region. The vertebral column also allows a wide range of movement in conjunction to protecting the spinal cord. And the wide range of movement it permits is side-to-side movement, front and back movement, and rotation movement. Now, as mentioned, in the class anatomical movement and movement terminology, or anatomical terminology and movement terminology, we look at the three planes of the body, or the three possible movements allowed by the body. One is forward and back, known as sagittal. Side to side is known as frontal, and rotation is known as transverse. That is, we have a sagittal plane of movement, forwards and backwards. We have a frontal plane of movement, which is side to side, and we have a transverse plane of movement, which is rotation. Now the vertebral column allows movement in all three planes of the body. And it's important for posture. If I have poor posture like so, I can utilise my vertebral column to correct my posture and prevent any ill health that can be caused by lifestyle concerns. Okay, the vertebral column consists of 5 regions. Starting at the cervical region is the top 7 vertebrae. In brackets we have 7 because the cervical vertebrae represents or contains 7 individual vertebrae. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this region in here represents the cervical vertebrae or the neck region of the vertebral column. Now the top 2 vertebrae of the cervical vertebrae are known as atlas and axis, or the atlo-axial joint. And the wonderful thing about the atlo-axial joint is it provides a very large degree of rotation from side to side, giving our head a nice mobile structure to work from. The very top or very first cervical vertebrae is known as Atlas, after the Greek god who had to carry the world on his shoulders. The next 12 vertebrae, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, are known as the thoracic vertebrae, which is basically the middle to upper back region, and it coincides quite nicely with the rib cage. Next 5 are the lumbar vertebrae, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The lumbar vertebrae of the lower back. Incidentally, the Australian Bureau of Statistics released data in 2006 that the most common injury in the workplace to the Australian worker was an injury to the lumbar region of the lower back, or the musculature of the lower back. Therefore, you've probably heard the term lumbar vertebrae before, which is basically your lower back region. Then we have the sacral vertebrae, which make up the sacrum. Basically 5 vertebrae all fused together to form the one structure, and that's known as our sacrum here. And our last structure right down the bottom is our coccyx, often has 3 or 4 fused vertebrae, also known as our tailbone. But together, from coccyx, sacrum, lumbar, thoracic, cervical, they all form the vertebral column, which is part of the axial skeleton. Bone types. Now, bones can be put into categories as either being short, flat, long or irregular, and this is an activity in your workbook. Short bones are basically the bones of the wrist. They are short, cube-shaped. Flat bones includes bones such as the sternum, the front of the body here, and the scapula or shoulder blade, named so because they are flat in appearance. We have long bones, which basically form the limbs of the body: humerus, radius ulna, femur, tibia, fibula as the best examples of long bones. And irregular bones are bones that don't match any of those categories. And the most common example of an irregular bone are the individual vertebrae. They're not short, they're not flat, and they're not long. Therefore, they're classified differently as an irregular bone type. Okay, looking at bone anatomy now, and I'm going to go through the terms diapiphysis, epiphysis and membranes. And probably the best way to do this is to use the whiteboard and draw you a cartoon style bone to represent this. Okay, here's our bone. Now the diapiphysis is basically the long shaft of the bone, which is this region in here, known as the diapiphysis. The epiphysis is where the bone starts to elongate and is a little bit wider than the shaft. It's typically the bone ends. So the epiphysis relates to the ends of the bone. These regions in here, they are known as the epiphysis. Another name for the epiphysis are growth plates. And when bone grows, as what happens during puberty, adolescence and early adulthood, they grow via the epiphysis. And the epiphysis elongate, causing elongation of the bone or growth of the bone. So another name for the epiphysis is growth plates. You've probably heard that term before. And damage to the growth plates caused by any means can cause premature closure of the growth plates or premature closure of the epiphysis, which will retard growth and development. And then we have membranes. Membranes basically cover the entire surface of the bone. They play 2 important roles. They increase the rigidity and strength of the bone, but they also contain wonderful cells, bone-specific cells, called osteoblasts and osteoclasts. And we'll talk about them in the next slide. As mentioned, osteoblasts are creation. They create or reform bone. Osteoclasts are destruction cells or destruction of the bone. Now, to highlight the importance of exercise on bone, we can utilise the roles of osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Now, bone responds to stress by becoming bigger and stronger, or thicker and stronger. So when we do weight-bearing exercise or resistance training, we put stress on the bone, which causes it to thicken, strengthen and increase its rigidity and minimise the likelihood of injury from fracture or fall. Now, weight-bearing exercise such as walking or running or cycling or swimming puts a load on the bone or a stress on the bone. Resistance training puts stress on the bone because it causes tendons to pull on the bone, therefore stressing the bone as well. So both resistance training and weight-bearing exercise are very effective and very important for normal bone health and maintenance. And this is basically what happens. When we go for an exercise session, let's say we go for a walk or a jog, what basically happens is our bone has little micro fractures or little breaks along the membrane or outside of the bone, like so. Immediately after the exercise session, osteoclasts, which are bone destruction cells, will migrate to this area and basically chew away and destroy all the fragile, thin, brittle bone that's been caused by these micro fractures. Immediately after that, osteoblasts, which are bone creation cells, migrate to the same area and lay down new bone, additional bone, thicker bone. So what basically happens, we have our microfractures caused by exercise, resistance training or weight bearing. Osteoclasts come and clear it all away. Then osteoblasts come and lay a new, thicker, more dense layer in response to the stress or the load that's been imposed by the weight bearing exercise or the resistance training that's been undertaken. So as you can see, exercise or exercise participation is very important for general health and well-being and maintaining the integrity and strength of bones, minimising the likelihood of injury or fractures that can be caused from various impacts. Thank you for your time and good luck with your study.